how can Indonesia, as the president of the G20, make the upcoming G20 summit relevant to the current world conditions and now filled with rivalries? So how?
G20 now is becoming
Dunia sedang mengalami berbagai krisis, seperti pangan, energi, dan keuangan yang harus dihadapi bersama oleh komunitas internasional. Untuk itu, platform multilateral dan regional seperti G20 dan ASEAN harus menjadi efektif kembali untuk mengatasi berbagai masalah yang ada. Halo pemirsa, Anda menyaksikan International Corner Antara bersama saya Gracia Simanjuntak. Saat ini saya bersama pendiri Organisasi Kebijakan Luar Negeri Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia (FPCI), Bapak Dino Patti Djalal. Welcome to our newsroom, Pak Dino.
Thank you, Grace. It's great to be here.
I hope you are well.
I'm very well, thank you.
Okay, we shall start our first segment, and it is about G20 and Russia-Ukraine issues. How does Indonesia, you think, anticipate possible friction during the G20 summit that will be held in this November, sir?
Well, I think we can already predict what is going to happen, judging from what has happened in previous working group meetings and engagement meetings of the G20. That is the fact that the G20 and Western members of the G20 will be in a contentious mode with the Russians.
Yeah.
So that will color a great deal of the discussions and the debate within the G20. So I think we should definitely anticipate that, and Indonesia being the chairman of the president of the G20 is going to be a huge challenge for us to manage a fictitious G20.
And we have anticipated it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, how can Indonesia, as the president of the G20, make the upcoming G20 summit relevant to the current world conditions and now filled with rivalries? So how?
Well, the G20 now is becoming the attention of the world because now we have so many problems, right? They call it the perfect storm, where we have multiple mega crises: the Ukraine war, the climate, the food, energy, and finance crisis. Even the pandemic is still with us. So all these things are converging and creating a very difficult, turbulent world. And the UN is there, obviously, but as you know, the UN has limitations in how to deal with these things. Having 198 countries and so on, and with limited authority. So the forum which has the best assets to deal with these is the G20, because it's 20 largest economies, and they make decisions that will affect the world economy effectively. In 2008, the G20 is what saved the world economy from going from recession to depression and back to recovery. So there's going to be a lot of attention on how the G20 can address these global challenges, but we need to manage expectation, Grace, because G20 is not the same anymore as before, and there is very good likelihood that the G20 in Bali will not produce a communique, unlike previous G20. So Indonesia has really a difficult task. First, trying to produce a communique, but if it's not likely, then at least achieve some kind of momentum on the issues that Indonesia considers a priority, which is health, digital economy, and green energy transition.
In your opinion, sir, how should Indonesia respond to the Russia-Ukraine conflict? What can Indonesia, as G20 president this year, do to help resolve the conflict?
Oh, I think, in my view, Indonesia, in our bilateral communication with Russia, we should strongly ask Russia, in this case President Putin, to de-escalate its military action in Ukraine, because that is what the international community is asking, yeah, and also to engage in peaceful dialogue with Ukraine to find a peaceful political settlement. Turkey is helping with that already, but it just needs a strong push. Yeah. And the G20 this year is going to be the focus of a great deal of attention because we have so many crises going on at once. We have the Ukraine war, obviously, and you have the food, energy, and finance crisis in terms of inflation and debt that is skyrocketing. We still have the pandemic with us, right? China is still in lockdown, and there's also the climate crisis, right? Now, the UN is a great multilateral forum to address that, but the UN has limited capacity. So the ones that is very policy oriented, the countries in the G20, right? Because in 2008, when we had the global financial crisis, it is the policy of the G20 that saved the world economy from going from recession to depression. And then they recovered again because of the G20 coordinated policies. So there's a lot of expectations on G20 this year, but G20 is divided. Right, so we need to make G20 effective in addressing the world issues, and one of the best solution is to end the Ukraine war, because a lot of the world economic problems now is resulting from the problems caused by the Ukraine war on food, energy.
That should be the priority.
I think so. Yeah.
Do you think Indonesia should reaffirm its role as a peacemaker between Russia and Ukraine, following President Jokowi's visit to both countries in June?
I think so. I think so, because Putin is very defensive towards the West. Right? He just doesn't listen and doesn't want anything to do with the West, right? Which he sees as the bad guy, right? But Putin doesn't have any animosity towards countries like Indonesia or India or Turkey. Right, which he sees as different from the West, right? So that's why President Jokowi was welcome when he visited Russia, after he visited Ukraine some month ago. So Indonesia does have some political capital, and I hope Indonesia uses that first to persuade President Putin, you have to end this war, because Russia is not going to win. In my view, Russia is never going to win conquering the whole Ukraine. And secondly, you're giving trouble to the world economy, to the rest of us. What happened in Ghana, right? The political upheavals due to the rise in food and energy costs and so on. So I think Indonesia does have a role, and we need to harness that capacity in our dealings with Russia, and also in terms of trying to find some opportunity for peace in Russia-Ukraine war.
During the FPCI discussion some time ago, President Volodymyr Zelensky expressed his hope that the G20 summit could provide a solution to the crisis in Ukraine. Now, do you think, or can this forum deliver a message of peace, and an effective push to end the conflict?
Well, it depends. If there is a communique, I hope that message is going to be part of that communique that usually is produced by the G20 every year. But there is increasing likelihood that this year's G20 will not produce a communique, and that's going to be unfortunate, right? But for the G20 to resolve the Russia-Ukraine war, I don't think that's going to happen, because G20 is not set up for that kind of purpose. But what can happen is the bilateral or trilateral meetings on the side of G20, where they may discuss these things, right? So, President Biden may meet with Xi Jinping and talk about, hey, can we work together to help end the war, right? And other bilateral meetings, including what Indonesia would try to set up, maybe meeting with President Putin, between President Jokowi and Putin, and President Jokowi and Biden, and so on. So I think the best hope is for these combination of bilateral meetings to be able to find some movement in the attempt to resolve the Russia-Ukraine war. But the G20 itself, when they meet 20 people, it's not going to be a negotiating process to end the war, right? Because it's not in the agenda.
Okay. Thank you so much, Pak Dino. We'll see you back in the second segment.
Thank you.
Demikian pemirsa perbincangan saya dengan Bapak Dino Patti Djalal. Sampai jumpa di International Corner segmen berikutnya.